At 10:30 p.m., the corridors of Minneapolis General Hospital were nearly silent except for the steady rhythm of ventilators and the distant hum of monitors. Dr. Rebecca Lane, the youngest cardiac surgeon on staff, adjusted her mask as she entered the operating room. The team was already waiting, 3 interns wide-eyed and eager, their nervous energy barely contained beneath the fluorescent lights. Rebecca's voice was calm, composed, almost melodic. Let's focus. The donor heart is ready. We move fast, but we don't rush. Even at that hour, there was authority in her tone, earned not by age but by precision. The interns watched as she moved with quiet confidence, her hands steady under the sterile glow. Within minutes, the room fell into synchronized rhythm. The soft clatter of instruments, the steady beep of the monitor, the faint hiss of the ventilator. Rebecca guided them through every incision and suture, her presence grounding the entire team. When the final suture was tied and the heart monitor's rhythm stabilized, a murmur of relief rippled through the room. "Excellent work, everyone," she said softly, eyes crinkling above her mask. "Let's make sure he wakes up to a steady rhythm." It was the kind of calm authority that made people trust her. Outside, she finally removed her gloves, washed her hands, and leaned against the counter. Her reflection in the stainless steel cabinet looked exhausted but proud. She pulled off her cap, letting her chestnut hair fall loose around her shoulders, and allowed herself one deep breath until her phone buzzed. David. She hesitated before answering. "Hey," she said quietly, stepping into the hallway. His voice was clipped, sharp even through the static. "Are you still at the hospital? There was an emergency transplant. I told you I might be late." There was a pause, then a sigh heavy with irritation. "Rebecca, you live there. I can't remember the last time we had dinner together. Do you even know what day it is?" She smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. "Thursday, and I'll be home soon. Promise." "Don't bother," he muttered. "You'll just fall asleep halfway through a sentence again." The line went dead. Rebecca lowered the phone, slowly, staring at the dark screen as if it might offer an explanation. The silence pressed in. After a moment, she slipped the phone into her pocket and exhaled. "Just another long day," she whispered to herself. She was about to leave when a voice called from behind. "Dr. Lane? Dr. Freeman wants to see you in his office. Says it's urgent." Her brow furrowed. It was unusual for Dr. Alan Freeman, the chief of surgery, to summon anyone at this hour. Still wearing her scrubs, she walked down the dim corridor to his office. The door was half open. He sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, face tight with impatience. "Rebecca," he said without preamble, "do you know why you're here?" "No, sir. I just finished the transplant." He slid a thin folder across the desk. "Then perhaps you can explain this." Inside were documents, medication logs, dosage sheets, and a consent form. Her signature was scrawled at the bottom of each. Dr. Freeman's eyes narrowed. "Controlled substances missing from the anesthesia storage, and a patient left paralyzed after your procedure last month." The same patient tied to this signature. She stared at the papers, speechless. "That can't be right. These aren't mine. Someone must have." "Enough," he interrupted, his tone turning cold. "You've been with us barely 2 years. I took a risk promoting you this early. Now you've compromised my department." Rebecca's pulse hammered in her ears. "Please check the logs. The security footage." "You'll see. I've seen enough," he said sharply. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Her lips parted, but no words came. The room spun, the edges blurring as the weight of disbelief settled over her. Slowly, she removed her gloves and placed them on the desk. One of them slipped, landing on the floor with a soft, sterile sound. She stared at it, white against the dark tile, a fragile symbol of everything she was about to lose. It was almost 1 a.m. when Rebecca finally unlocked the door to their apartment. The hallway light flickered once, then dimmed, throwing long shadows across the living room. Her hands trembled as she placed her hospital bag by the door, the sterile smell of antiseptic still clinging to her scrubs. The silence inside felt heavier than the one she'd left behind in the operating room. From the bedroom came the sound of shifting sheets, then David's voice, thick with sleep and irritation. "Rebecca? What the hell? Do you have any idea what time it is?" She froze, her throat tightening. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice small. There was a problem at the hospital." David sat up, rubbing his eyes. The dim light from the hallway revealed his furrowed brow and clenched jaw. "A problem? You look like you saw a ghost. What happened?" "You didn't." His tone shifted, sharp and cold. "You didn't get arrested, did you?" The question sliced through her like glass. "Of course not," she said, forcing a weak laugh that died almost immediately. "It's just they think someone forged my signature on a report. They're saying I mishandled medication, that I hurt a patient." David blinked, the words seeming to take a moment to land. "They're saying what?" She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong. Dr. Freeman, he showed me papers with my name on them. But I swear I've never even seen those forms. There has to be a mistake. I need you to believe me, David." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled through his nose and swung his legs off the bed. "You always said you were careful. How could something like this even happen?" "Because someone wanted it to," she whispered. "Maybe a mix-up or—" "Rebecca," he cut in, his voice flat. "You've been working insane hours for months. Maybe you did mess up and just don't remember. I mean, you barely sleep anymore." She flinched. "You think I'd forget paralyzing a patient?" He didn't answer. He simply stood, walking past her toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked under his feet. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and drank in silence. "I just need you to stand by me," she said softly, following him with her eyes. "Please, until this is cleared up." David turned, the faint light from the fridge reflecting in his eyes. "You should get some sleep," he said finally, shutting the door with a dull thud. "You're exhausted. We'll talk when you're calmer." He brushed past her, heading back to the bedroom. The sound of the mattress creaking was the only reply she got. Rebecca stood motionless in the dark kitchen, staring at the space he'd just left. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Slowly, she sank to the floor, her back against the cold cabinet, her body curling inward as if to disappear. Her chest felt hollow, her throat raw from holding back tears. For years, that apartment had been a sanctuary, a place of warmth, laughter, and quiet understanding. Now, it felt foreign, stripped of safety. She turned her head toward the faint glint of her wedding ring in the dim light above the stove. The gold band caught the glow for a moment before fading back into shadow, cold and distant, just like the man who had given it to her. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, cutting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside. Rebecca stood in the living room, still wearing her robe, surrounded by the ghosts of the night before. The argument with David replayed in her head, each word sharp and hollow. She needed something, anything, to silence the noise in her chest. So she started cleaning. She moved mechanically, gathering empty glasses, folding blankets, aligning books that hadn't been touched in months. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the scent of coffee. As she wiped the dust from a cabinet, her hand froze on a framed photograph tucked behind a vase, a picture of her mother, smiling faintly despite the exhaustion etched in her face. The image cracked something open. Memories poured in. A small house on the edge of town, peeling wallpaper, the constant rattle of bottles from her father's drinking. her mother working double shifts at the diner, coming home with grease on her apron and a soft kiss for Rebecca, no matter how tired she was. At 13, Rebecca had scrubbed tables and stocked shelves to help pay bills. Her hands had learned the shape of effort long before they learned the weight of a scalpel. She remembered the night her father stumbled in, shouting, and her mother pulled her close, whispering, "You'll be something more than this, Becca. You'll save people one day." That promise had carried her through the sleepless years that followed, through medical school, through endless rotations, through every moment she'd thought she wasn't strong enough. Now, staring at the photograph, she felt her throat tighten. Her mother had fought so hard to give her a future, and somehow Rebecca had let it unravel. She set the photo down and turned toward the bookshelf. There, between two dusty textbooks, was another frame, a snapshot from her early 20s, a cafe near campus, autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalk. David had been behind her in line, phone in hand, too distracted to notice when she turned too quickly and spilled hot coffee down his crisp white shirt. She'd gasped, fumbling for napkins, mortified. He'd laughed, that easy, confident laugh that made her heart stumble. "Guess you owe me a new shirt," he'd said, grinning. They'd spent the rest of that afternoon talking at a corner table. He'd been charming, ambitious, full of plans. He'd told her she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Focused, grounded, real. Back then, he'd made her believe that being with him meant safety, that together they could build something solid, unshakable. She traced a finger over the glass, over their younger faces, frozen in that moment of light. How far away it felt now, like watching strangers she barely recognized. The woman in the photo was laughing unguarded, eyes shining with trust. The man beside her was the same one who had asked, "Did you get arrested?" Rebecca swallowed hard and set the frame down. The air in the apartment felt heavy, thick with the scent of lemon cleaner and regret. She sank onto the couch, her gaze drifting to the wall where their wedding photo hung. A picture taken beneath a canopy of white roses, sunlight catching the edge of her veil. Her hand trembled as she reached up to touch it. The glass was cool beneath her fingertips, her reflection faint beside the younger version of herself. Smiling, radiant, utterly certain. Now, the smile in the frame felt like a memory from another life. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a quiet ache. Rebecca let her hand fall to her lap, the echo of that old promise ringing faintly in her mind. "You'll be something more than this." But sitting there in the morning silence, surrounded by everything that was slipping away, she wasn't sure anymore if she still believed it. The afternoon light slanted weakly through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the floor. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee growing cold beside her. Her mind was a blur of hospital corridors, angry voices, and the weight of Dr. Freeman's words echoing in her head. Every time she blinked, she saw that file, the forged signature, the accusations staring back at her like a scar she couldn't erase. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the one name she trusted most. Claire Mitchell. They had met in college. Rebecca, studying pre-med. Claire studying law. Back then, Claire had been the kind of friend who showed up with pizza and sarcasm when exams got too hard. The person who could read her mood just by the sound of her breathing. The call connected after 2 rings. "Rebecca? Hey, it's been forever. What's going on?" Rebecca hesitated. Her voice came out small. "Claire, I need help. Legal help." The shift in Claire's tone was immediate. "What happened?" Rebecca told her everything. The meeting with Dr. Freeman. The documents, the false accusations. Her words tumbled out too fast, cracking halfway through. "They think I stole controlled substances, Claire. That I hurt a patient. But I swear to you I didn't. Someone's framing me." On the other end, there was a pause, then the quiet sound of typing. "Okay," Claire said evenly. "First thing, You say nothing to anyone else. No statements, no interviews, no clarifying with colleagues. You're officially under investigation now. Anything you say could get twisted. Rebecca swallowed, nodding even though Claire couldn't see her. What about the signature? That's our first lead, Claire replied. Send me copies of every form you've signed in the last 6 months. Surgical consents, med logs, anything. I'll have a forensic examiner compare handwriting. If it's forged, we'll know. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope, small but real. Thank you. I didn't know who else to call. Don't thank me yet, Claire said softly. This kind of setup doesn't happen by accident. Someone wants you gone, and they're smart enough to cover their tracks. You need to stay calm and keep every record you can find. Rebecca agreed, her fingers trembling as she began sorting through files, pulling out copies and scanning them one by one. It was mechanical, mind-numbing work, but it gave her something to hold on to, a purpose in the middle of chaos. By the time evening fell, the sky outside had turned gray and heavy. Rebecca sent the last of the documents and finally let herself sit down. Her phone buzzed again. David. She hesitated before answering. Hi, she said quietly. He didn't return the greeting. His tone was clipped cold. I got a call from someone at the hospital. They said you're being investigated for theft. Is that true? Rebecca's heart clenched. David, it's not what it sounds like. They're wrong. Someone forged my... He cut her off. Rebecca, stop. Do you have any idea what this could do to me? To my clients? My reputation? Her voice broke. I just need you to trust me. I can't live with someone who's under criminal investigation, he said flatly. I'm sorry. The line went dead. For a moment, Rebecca just stared at the phone in her hand, waiting for the sound of his voice to return. It didn't. Her fingers loosened. The phone slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a hollow crack. The apartment fell silent again. In the hallway mirror, her reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, unrecognizable. The confident surgeon, the woman who once commanded a room, now looked like a stranger standing in the wreckage of her own life. A week later, the apartment that once smelled of warm coffee and lavender candles now felt like a waiting room before a storm. Rebecca had spent the past few days in silence, trying to keep herself from falling apart. The curtains stayed drawn. The air was thick with the scent of cleaning supplies and cold air from the cracked window. Every night she'd wake from shallow sleep, certain she'd heard a key turning in the door. That morning it finally happened. The lock clicked, and David stepped inside as if he still lived there. He wore a suit, crisp and freshly pressed, his cologne cutting through the stale air. Rebecca stood from the couch, her pulse quickening. You could have called, she said quietly. He shrugged, setting down his keys on the counter. Didn't think I needed permission. I still live here. Technically. Her jaw tightened. You said you were staying with your mother. I am, he replied, glancing around, assessing the place like a realtor preparing to list it. Just came to grab a few things. Rebecca folded her arms, then grabbed them and go. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You know, I talked to my lawyer. Turns out this apartment, he gestured around, casual and cruel, is in my name. So if anyone's leaving, it's you. The words hit her like a physical blow. That's not true. We bought it together. I've been paying half the mortgage from my salary. Correction, he interrupted. You were paying. You don't have a salary anymore. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The sharpness in his tone, the indifference. It was as if he was cutting her away piece by piece. You can't just throw me out, David. He smiled faintly. Watch me. Something inside her snapped. Weeks of fear and humiliation coiled into a single, trembling moment. She stepped forward and slapped him, the sound sharp in the still air. His head jerked to the side, shock flashing across his face. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then he straightened, smirking as he rubbed his cheek. "There it is," he said softly. "The temper everyone warned me about." Rebecca's hand shook, but she said nothing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "You might want to sit down for this." She didn't move. He opened the folder and laid several glossy photographs across the counter. The images showed her in what looked like a hotel room, standing close to another man, laughing, touching his arm. Rebecca's stomach twisted. "What is this?" David leaned on the counter, his voice low, measured. "Evidence. You and some guy from the hospital. I've already filed the divorce petition. Adultery and misconduct." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's not me. Those are fake." He shrugged. "The court will decide. But I'd start packing if I were you." The room spun around her. She reached for the photos, her vision blurring, her breath shallow. "How could you do this?" David's gaze hardened. "You ruined your own career, Rebecca. Don't pin this on me." He gathered the papers and slipped them back into his briefcase. "I'll send someone for the rest of my things next week. Try not to make a scene." He turned toward the door. She stood frozen, every muscle in her body trembling. When the door shut behind him, the echo seemed to stretch forever. Rebecca sank onto the edge of the couch, staring at her hands. The sting still burned across her palm, a raw reminder of the line she'd finally drawn. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even defiance. But for the first time, she hadn't begged, hadn't tried to make him understand. The red mark on her skin pulsed softly under the dim light, the only proof that she was still capable of fighting back. The courthouse in downtown Minneapolis was colder than Rebecca expected. The marble floors echoed every footstep, and the air smelled faintly of polish and paper. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Claire Mitchell, who was flipping through folders with steady precision. Across the aisle, David leaned back in his chair, exuding confidence. He was dressed impeccably, the picture of calm self-assurance. Rebecca's palms were damp. The faint murmur of voices in the gallery blurred into a single hum until the bailiff called the room to order. Judge Harper entered, expression unreadable. "Case number 23H417, the clerk announced. Lane versus Lane, property dispute." Rebecca swallowed. It felt surreal, hearing her name turned into a case file. Claire rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client, Dr. Rebecca Lane, contests the transfer of property ownership. The defendant, Mr. David Lane, coerced her into signing a quitclaim deed under false pretenses while she was under emotional distress due to an ongoing criminal investigation, an investigation later shown to be inconclusive. David's lawyer, a tall man in a navy suit named Mr. Chandler, countered. "Your Honor, the document was signed willingly. Mr. Lane simply seeks lawful possession of the property that is rightfully his." Judge Harper nodded. "Proceed." Claire presented evidence first. Bank statements, mortgage records, proof of joint payments. Each document painted the same truth. The apartment had been purchased and maintained by both of them. Rebecca's name had been erased only after the scandal broke at the hospital. Then the defense took the floor. Chandler paced as he spoke, playing to the audience as much as the judge. "Your Honor, while the plaintiff claims coercion, we have substantial reason to question her credibility." The words hit Rebecca like ice water. She glanced at Claire, who gave a small nod, signaling her to stay quiet. Chandler gestured toward the gallery. "We have a witness who can speak to the plaintiff's character. Mrs. Helen Lane." Rebecca's breath caught. Helen, her mother-in-law, stepped forward in her pearl necklace and pastel suit, every inch the dignified matriarch. She offered the judge a tight smile before fixing her gaze on Rebecca. "Your Honor," she began, her voice syrupy with feigned sympathy, "I wish this weren't necessary, but Dr. Lane has caused nothing but turmoil in my son's life. She's always been. Difficult. Claire rose. Objection, irrelevant character attack. Overruled, Judge Harper said mildly. Proceed, Mrs. Lane. Helen continued, enjoying every word. She's been secretive, self-righteous. And to think, she's doing all this while carrying his child. A ripple spread through the courtroom. Cameras flashed from the back row. Rebecca's face drained of color. Her pregnancy, barely a few weeks along, known only to her doctor and Claire, was now public. Claire immediately stood. Objection, Your Honor. That information is confidential and has no bearing on property division. Judge Harper banged the gavel once. Sustained. The court will disregard that remark. But the damage was done. Whispering filled the air, and Rebecca's stomach twisted. As the tension thickened, Chandler pretended to shuffle through his briefcase. A folder slipped from his hands, scattering glossy photos across the table. Images of Rebecca in a hotel room with a man she didn't know. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Chandler, the judge said sharply, is this your evidence? He stooped to gather the pictures, feigning embarrassment. Apologies, Your Honor. These were part of a private investigation into Dr. Lane's conduct. Irrelevant, of course, but they do exist. Rebecca's pulse pounded in her ears. Those are fake, she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the murmurs. Claire snapped. Your Honor, this is outrageous. There's no foundation for these photos. This is blatant defamation. Judge Harper's gaze flicked between them. Enough. Both sides will stick to property matters. By the time closing statements began, Rebecca felt like she was watching from outside her own body. Claire's words were strong, logical, but David's calm demeanor, his mother's poised cruelty, and the weight of those photographs had already tilted the room. The judge adjusted his glasses. Given the signed documentation and lack of conclusive evidence of coercion, this court grants ownership of the property at 412 North 10th Street to Mr. David Lane. The sound of the gavel echoed like a shot. Rebecca sat frozen, staring at the table. The world narrowed to a single ringing tone in her ears. Claire's voice was distant, pleading, Rebecca, breathe. But the floor seemed to tilt beneath her. The last thing she saw before darkness closed in was the polished wood of the judge's bench, the gavel still in his hand. Then nothing. When she collapsed, the courtroom erupted in noise, but Rebecca heard none of it. The echo of that gavel, the cold, final sound of judgment, was the only thing that followed her into unconsciousness. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air when Rebecca opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was a blur of white panels and humming fluorescent lights. For a moment, she couldn't tell where she was, only that everything hurt. Her throat was dry, her limbs heavy. Then a familiar voice broke through the fog. Hey, Claire said softly, leaning over her. You're safe. You're at Minneapolis General. Rebecca blinked, trying to focus. What happened? Claire's smile faltered. The exhaustion behind her eyes impossible to hide. You collapsed at the courthouse. They said it was stress and dehydration. You've been out for a while. Rebecca turned her head toward the window. Gray daylight pressed weakly through the blinds. The muffled sound of hospital carts and distant voices echoed down the corridor. The trial, she murmured. I lost, didn't I? Claire hesitated, then nodded once. Yes, but that's not what matters right now. Rebecca's lips trembled, though she couldn't tell if it was anger or grief. He took everything, Claire. The apartment, my name. My reputation. What else could there be to lose? Before Claire could answer, the door opened. A doctor in green scrubs stepped in, glancing at the chart. Dr. Lane, he began carefully, you gave us a scare. You had some bleeding, but the baby's heartbeat is strong. Rebecca's gaze snapped toward him. The baby, he nodded. You were close to miscarrying, but we stabilized you. You'll need rest. No stress, no overexertion. Your friend here hasn't left your side." Claire gave a small, tired laugh. "He's right about that. You're stuck with me for a bit." When the doctor left, silence settled again. Rebecca stared at the 4 line in her arm, at the faint pulse beneath her skin. The word baby echoed in her mind like a foreign language. Something fragile, undeserved yet real. Claire pulled a chair closer. "Rebecca," she said gently, "I know you want to fight him, but don't chase money or revenge. He'll dig himself a deeper hole eventually. Let the truth find its way on its own." Rebecca's eyes stayed fixed on the window. "You really think justice works that way?" "I think you work that way," Claire said. "You're stronger than what they took from you." Rebecca didn't answer. The silence between them was heavy, but not hopeless. After a long moment, she lowered her hand to her stomach, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. For the first time in weeks, her breathing slowed. The anger, the shame, the noise, all of it faded into something quieter. There was nothing left to fight for tonight except the faint, persistent heartbeat beneath her hand. She closed her eyes, her fingers resting protectively over her belly. In that small gesture, barely visible under the hospital blanket, was the first sign of life she'd felt in herself for a very long time. 3 months later, the world outside Rebecca's window looked different, quieter, smaller. The snow had melted into thin puddles along the sidewalks, and early spring rain streaked the glass of her small apartment in the suburbs of Minneapolis. The place was modest, a second-floor walk-up with creaking floors and a leaky faucet, but it was hers. There was no echo of another person's voice, no accusation hanging in the air, only the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. Every morning, she sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, her laptop open to the same endless list of job postings. Every hospital she applied to sent polite rejections. Some didn't reply at all. The news of her suspension had traveled fast. No one wanted to hire a surgeon with a pending case, even one that was quietly dismissed. Her license was still valid, but her reputation wasn't. The baby had started to move, small flutters that felt both alien and reassuring. She rested her hand over her belly sometimes, wondering what kind of life she could build for a child when her own had fallen apart. That morning, her eyes caught on a small ad buried between listings for dental assistants and urgent care nurses. Private home visit physician needed new community, clinic seeking, part-time practitioner, flexible hours, experience preferred. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't surgery, but it was something. Rebecca clicked apply before she could talk herself out of it. 2 days later, she stood outside a low, newly renovated building at the edge of town. The rain had just started, a misting drizzle that clung to her coat. A hand-painted sign above the door read Midtown Family Clinic. The windows glowed with warm light, and through them she could see a few patients waiting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. At the front desk, a young receptionist gave her a nervous smile. "Dr. Lane? Mr. Peterson will see you now." Mr. Peterson, the clinic manager, was a stout man in his 50s with tired eyes. He gestured for her to sit, flipping through her resume. "You have impressive credentials," he said, "but you understand why this is complicated." Rebecca nodded. "I do. I just need a chance to work again. I can start with house calls, basic checkups, wound care, palliative visits, whatever you need." He studied her for a moment. "You're pregnant." "Yes," she said simply. He sighed. "You don't make this easy for me." "I'm not asking for easy," she replied. "I'm asking for honest." The room went quiet. Then, slowly he closed the folder. "All right, Dr. Lane, I can't pay hospital wages, but if you're willing to drive across town for home visits, the job's yours. 3 months trial." For the first time in what felt like forever, Rebecca smiled. That's more than enough. When she stepped back outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. The street was nearly empty, the sound of tires hissing against wet pavement filling the air. Rebecca stopped under the awning, holding the folded white coat Mr. Peterson had handed her before she left. She ran her fingers over the fabric, the same kind she used to wear in the operating room, now freshly pressed and untouched. It wasn't power or prestige or redemption, but it was work. It was a beginning. Rebecca stepped into the rain. The coat clutched to her chest. The water was cold. The air smelled of wet asphalt and new leaves. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest eased. She walked down the quiet street, her shoes splashing softly in the puddles, the white coat a fragile promise in her hands, a symbol of who she once was and who she might still become. The scent of antiseptic and coffee had become part of Rebecca's daily routine. Midtown Family Clinic was small but busy, filled with the quiet rhythm of lives trying to mend. After weeks of home visits, she had earned the trust of her patients and a polite kind of respect from her coworkers. It wasn't the operating room, but it was healing in its own way. That afternoon, rain tapped softly against the windows of the staff lounge. Rebecca was finishing her notes at the corner table when a burst of laughter broke her concentration. A group of young nurses huddled near the vending machine, scrolling through their phones. "Look at this," one of them giggled, nudging another. "Megan's new boyfriend is ridiculously handsome." Rebecca smiled faintly without looking up. She'd heard the name Megan Walters before, one of the new hires, a nurse who had recently transferred from another clinic. Megan was young, ambitious, always arriving with perfectly styled hair and a perfume that lingered down the hall. Rebecca didn't know her well, but the girl had a confidence that drew attention everywhere she went. Oh my God, he looks like he stepped out of a magazine," another nurse said, leaning in. She said, "He works in real estate, right?" Rebecca tried to stay focused on her paperwork, but the words real estate flickered in her mind. She froze, her pen pausing mid-sentence. "Yeah," the first nurse said. "Apparently he's super successful, owns properties across the city." Megan said, "He's divorced, something messy with his ex-wife being a doctor, or something like that." The room seemed to tilt. Rebecca looked up slowly. Her heart began to pound in her chest. "Here, look," one of them said, turning the phone around. "That's him." The screen lit up with a photo, Megan smiling in a restaurant, her arm looped through the man beside her, his familiar jawline, the easy charm in his expression, the silver watch glinting under the light. David. Rebecca's stomach dropped. For a second, she couldn't breathe. The laughter around her faded into a low, distorted hum. She reached out before she realized what she was doing, her voice barely audible. "May I see that?" The nurse blinked, surprised, but handed her the phone. It was him, without question, David Lane, her husband, her accuser, the man who had walked out of their apartment without looking back, now sitting across a dinner table, his hand resting over Megan's, smiling like the world had never broken. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she stared at the screen. Every breath felt sharp like glass in her lungs. The images flipped, Megan and David at a lakeside cabin, in his car, at a wine bar she and David had once gone to for their anniversary. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you say she met him?" The nurse shrugged. "Some charity gala a few months ago, I think." "Why?" Rebecca handed back the phone with shaking hands. "No reason," she said quietly. Her voice didn't sound like her own. She turned away before anyone could notice her face, gathering her things with trembling fingers. The room blurred, the laughter, the smell of coffee, the low hum of the refrigerator, everything folding in on itself. As she reached the door, one of the nurses called after her, "Dr. Lane, are you okay?" She didn't answer. Rebecca pushed through the hallway. her breath coming in shallow bursts. The fluorescent lights overhead felt too bright, the corridor too long. She reached the end, pressed her back to the wall, and slid down until she was sitting on the cold tile floor. Her chest heaved, but no tears came. Only a wave of hollow disbelief, as if her mind refused to accept what her eyes had seen. He hadn't just replaced her. He had chosen her enemy, Megan Walters, the same nurse from her old hospital, the one who had access to controlled substances, the one who could have forged those records. The realization hit like a knife. Her head spun, nausea rising. Rebecca fumbled for her phone, but stopped halfway. What would she even say? To Claire? To anyone? There were no words big enough for this kind of betrayal. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the lounge again. She could still hear Megan's name, the sparkle of admiration in their voices. Rebecca pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, her pulse roaring in her ears. The hallway lights flickered above her as her vision swam. The folder she'd been holding slipped from her grasp, scattering papers across the floor. A single photograph, Megan and David, smiling, slid out among them and landed face up on the tile. Rebecca stared at it for a long time, her body still, her eyes burning. Then she turned away, leaving it where it fell. The picture stayed behind on the cold floor, its glossy surface catching the light, a cruel reflection of a truth that could never again be hidden. The morning light was sharp and clear, painting the streets of Minneapolis in pale gold. Rebecca's phone rang just as she was loading her medical bag into the trunk. DR. Lane? We have an emergency call out. Elderly male, possible cardiac event. The receptionist said breathlessly. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, she pulled up in front of a modest craftsman-style house at the edge of town. The porch light was on despite the sunlight, the front door already open. Inside, the faint smell of sawdust and varnish lingered in the air. A man was kneeling beside an older gentleman, slumped on a recliner. He just collapsed, the man said, his voice steady but urgent. I called 911. They said you were closest. Rebecca knelt beside the patient, checking his pulse. Weak, but there, she murmured. Sir, can you hear me? The man helping her, tall, broad-shouldered, with faint scars tracing one arm, followed her instructions without hesitation. He moved with the discipline of someone used to emergencies. When the ambulance arrived, they worked side by side to stabilize the patient until the paramedics took over. Only when the sirens faded did she notice how pale the man had become. You okay? She asked. He nodded once, then swayed. Before she could reach him, his knees buckled and he went down. Hey, stay with me, she said quickly, checking his pulse. It was strong, but his breathing was shallow. You need a doctor too. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Lucky for me, I've got one right here. By the time he came to, he was lying on a couch, Rebecca's stethoscope pressed to his chest. You're dehydrated, she said. When's the last time you ate something? Can't remember. He sat up slowly. Adam Cooper, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Used to be Minneapolis PD, got out a few years back. Injury on the job. Rebecca Lane, she replied, shaking it. Clinic doctor, sometimes paramedic, part-time miracle worker. He chuckled, the sound warm despite the exhaustion. You're the one who just saved old Mr. Benson. He's my neighbor. I do his repairs when he can't. Over the next few days, Adam stopped by the clinic to thank her properly. He brought coffee, small talk, and a quiet steadiness that felt unfamiliar but welcome. They talked, first about medicine, then about life. One morning, after she'd finished a home visit, she found him waiting outside with 2 sandwiches and an easy grin. Lunch, he said, for the woman who looks like she forgets to eat. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. Eventually, their conversations turned to the past. One rainy evening, she told him everything, The false accusation, the courtroom, the betrayal. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable until she finished. "That's a hell of a setup," he said finally. "And the cops never looked into the records." "They called it an internal matter," she said. "The hospital closed the investigation when I left." Adam leaned back, thinking, "I might still know a few people in records. You said there were cameras in the storage area." Rebecca nodded. "Yes, but they claimed the footage was deleted." He smiled faintly. "Footage like that isn't really deleted. It's archived. You just need the right request form and a subpoena." She stared at him. "You can do that." "Not me," he said. "But a friend in the DA's office owes me a favor." 2 weeks later, Claire called her in disbelief. "Rebecca, you won't believe this. We got the footage." Rebecca's heart pounded as she watched the grainy black and white video in Claire's office. The timestamp matched the day she was accused. The figure on screen moved quickly, wearing her lab coat, swiping an ID card, her ID card. The camera angle shifted just enough to catch the woman's face as she turned toward the door. Megan Walters. Rebecca covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. "It was her," she whispered. "All along." Claire nodded grimly. "The DA's opening a case against Dr. Freeman for obstruction and falsifying evidence. Megan and David are both implicated in the civil suit." When the final hearing concluded weeks later, Rebecca stood in the same courthouse where she had once fainted. This time, the judge's tone was calm but decisive. "Charges against Dr. Rebecca Lane are hereby dismissed. Her record is cleared." Outside, the air smelled of rain and spring grass. Adam waited by the steps, a paper cup of coffee in hand. "Told you the truth has a way of coming back," he said. She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The courthouse doors swung shut behind her, and she exhaled, slow, steady, free. That night at home, Rebecca unfolded the envelope the court clerk had given her. Inside was a single sheet, case cleared. She ran her hand over the printed words, tracing each letter as if memorizing their shape. Then she placed the paper on the table beside her stethoscope. The weight that had lived in her chest for so long finally lifted. For the first time in years, Rebecca Lane wasn't surviving. She was alive. A year later, the garden behind the small cottage in the suburbs of Minneapolis glowed with color. Wildflowers climbed over the fence, the air heavy with the scent of lilac and new grass. Beneath a white arch wrapped in ivy, Rebecca stood in a simple ivory dress, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief that life had led her here again. A few rows of chairs lined the lawn, filled with faces that had become her new family, neighbors, patients, a few nurses from the clinic, and Claire, who had insisted on handling every detail. At the far end of the aisle, Adam Cooper waited, wearing a navy suit that still somehow looked rugged on him. When she met his eyes, everything else blurred, the past, the courtroom, the betrayal. There was only the quiet certainty of the man standing before her. The ceremony was short. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," Rebecca smiled through tears. The crowd clapped softly as Adam drew her close, the sunlight catching on the silver band around her finger. Later, as the guests mingled, laughter rippled across the garden. A soft breeze carried the scent of peonies, brushing against Rebecca's shoulders. She turned to where a small boy sat on a blanket under the shade of a maple tree. Ethan, barely toddling, reached for the petals falling around him, giggling when one landed on his nose. His scar, a faint reminder of the heart surgery he'd endured months earlier, was now almost invisible. Adam crouched beside the boy, ruffling his hair. "He's got your stubbornness," he said with a grin. "And your timing," Rebecca teased. "He wakes up the second you sit down." They laughed, and for a moment everything felt suspended, time, regret, even memory. There was only sunlight and peace. When the guests began to leave, Claire hugged Rebecca tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You didn't just survive. You built something beautiful." After everyone was gone, Rebecca and Adam walked through the quiet garden, their hands intertwined. The sky was turning pink at the edges, the last of the daylight softening the world around them. "Dr. Freeman tried to call," Adam said gently. "Wanted to apologize." Rebecca shook her head. "Let it go. Some chapters don't need revisiting." She had refused every offer to return to the hospital that once cast her out. Instead, she and Adam had founded a small community medical service, traveling between neighborhoods to provide care for families who couldn't afford it. It wasn't fame. It wasn't recognition. It was healing, both for others and for herself. Rebecca paused beside a bed of camellias just starting to bloom. The morning dew still clung to their petals, catching the fading light like tiny crystals. She knelt, brushing her fingers over one flower as a soft smile touched her lips. She had lost everything once, her career, her home, her faith in people. But standing there, surrounded by laughter and the scent of new life, she realized something simple yet profound. She had lost everything once, but what she rebuilt was hers alone. The petals stirred in the breeze, glistening with the last trace of morning mist, a quiet, living symbol of rebirth.